Welcome to the 0+1 podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the 0+1 podcast. I am your host, Hayden Wade. Today we have a special guest on today, Wyatt. I'll let him introduce himself and then we'll jump right into things.
Yeah, thanks, Hayden. My name's Wyatt. I graduated from UW-Platteville in 2016 with a computer science degree. Um, After that, for a little over 2 years, I was in ERP consulting as a developer on the NetSuite platform. Then after that, I went to Japan to teach English for a year, came back at the beginning of coronavirus, and after 5 months, landed a brand new software engineering job that I'm really happy at.
That's awesome, dude. So yeah, Wyatt and I met in college and been in touch ever since. I ended up, if you guys saw my Japan trip videos, I met up with Wyatt when he was out there. We had a great time in Fukuoka. Um, Lots of great memories. Probably ones we're not going to share on this podcast, but if you guys are interested, leave a comment. Maybe we'll drop those on my other channel. But yeah, so it sounds like you took a little time off to go try teaching. Um, I guess what was challenging about getting back into the job market and looking for a software engineering position?
Right. So interestingly enough, um, the hardest part wasn't like being away for a year. I seemed to be fine, but it was more challenging trying to transition to new technologies. So I was in the NetSuite ERP world for a few years. That was my first job out of college. And then when I came back from Japan, I was trying to uh, apply to jobs where they wanted knowledge of like Java or .NET, um, being on an Agile team instead of consulting, um, front end frameworks, that kind of stuff,
Sure, sure.
or general application development, I guess you could call it.
Did you, so you said it's more challenging to like the transition from NetSuite to these other technologies. Was it hard finding jobs or like getting interviews?
Um, yeah, it was. There was a lot of just kind of getting auto disqualified at the beginning just from not having the right um, technology experience on my resume. You know, they want 2 years of ASP.NET. I don't have that, so I don't get interviewed. So not really anything I can do about it.
Sure.
And most employers haven't heard of NetSuite, so that makes it difficult too because they don't know really where you're coming from or how it could help them.
Right.
They just see you as someone who's not qualified.
Right. Um, so you mentioned being away for a year didn't really hurt you. Like anybody else, for those people who were in your shoes and considering, hey, should I go to another country, do this thing for a year, leave their current job, would you recommend those people do that? Or did you go through interviews and people asked you about that, and then maybe that looked bad or uh, turned some potential offers away?
I don't think it hurt me at all. No, that said, we're pretty young. We're in our mid 20s, so we're all doing a lot of job hopping and stuff, anyways. Um, Although that said, I was programming as a hobby while I was there, and that's kind of the cool thing about being a software developer is you can do it on your own time. Um, what I was, we could get into what I was doing in my spare time there. I think that'd be useful just so
Yeah,
people can
yeah,
gauge,
yeah. Let's
okay,
dive
what
in.
kind of a side project am I going to need to land a job when I come back?
Right. I think that's very helpful.
Um, what I made, I don't think I made anything like super duper mind blowing. I decided to get into Node.js and React. Um, those are pretty trendy right now. And NetSuite uses JavaScript, so I could kind of build on stuff I already knew.
Right.
Um, in Japanese, they call it shiritori. In English, we call it word complete. So it's two players over the internet. Um, you exchange words. If I say cat, now you have to say a word that starts with T, and you go
Turtle.
back and forth
Yeah.
like that.
Okay.
That's all I made. So that's the game. UI is basically like it looks like a chat app, and then it's just that, and it's got like logging in and out. You can change your username, reset your password, that type of stuff. It's hosted on AWS. Code's up on GitHub. Um, so yeah, if that's what I did, that was on the very top of my resume when I came back from Japan.
Yeah, I think it's super helpful. Like if you're trying to get a job in different technology, maybe put in a little time to learn those. So like what you did is you learned Node.js, um, did some React, and then I know we've talked a lot off this podcast prior to this, but like you also did some like AWS certifications, um, which do you think those played any part in your
Um,
success?
well, I did some free training that Amazon has. I didn't get a full-on certification
Okay,
because I think it was like it's several $100s for a class, and I don't think you need to fork over tons of money in order to revamp your technical skills like I did.
right. So for people who don't have a job, you could zero to a few dollars, you could get into some new technology, learn some new things to make yourself a good looking candidate.
I think so. There's some Udemy courses, things like that. Although, one piece of advice, if you're going to depend on your self-taught skills to get a job, um, try to get to a point where you can work directly off the documentation for whatever technology you're using. Don't just do a Udemy course and call it a day, because there's a zillion of them out there. Not all of them are good. Um, you can use them as a starting point, but don't stop there. Start cruising documentation for whatever technology you're getting into. Start building your own projects, stuff like that.
Sure. How did you bring up your side projects in your interviews?
Um, Usually, what would happen is they'd start off early in the interview process with "Tell me about yourself," and I'd get to the point where I'd say I just came back from Japan and I revamped my technical skills. This is what I did. This is what I made. Feel free to like check out my GitHub, or feel free to ask me more about this project.
Okay.
Some employers, mainly third-party recruiters, it didn't seem like self-taught stuff count to them. So you will encounter that. There will be some companies where self-taught stuff just doesn't matter to them. They
Okay.
think you're just trying to BS them, and if it didn't happen for an employer, it doesn't count.
That's too bad because really at the end of the day, because when I interview people, I really look at, hey, do they know these different technologies? Can they code? Are they somebody I want to work with? And if you're just going to cut somebody out without actually understanding their technical
Hmm.
skills, you're missing a potentially a good candidate.
Yeah. Now that said, recruiters, those guys aren't technical people, so they can't evaluate your technical skills.
Right.
But if I could get over that and get into an interview with some developers who could actually ask me about the project, um, the interviews generally went well. Technical interviews generally went well for me, I'd say.
Okay. Was there anything challenging about the technical interviews, or maybe I know we talked a little bit about how uh, interviews are a little bit not as technical as some would think, especially in the Midwest. Like maybe you want to hit on that a little bit.
Yeah, and just as a FYI for anyone listening to this for me this concerns jobs in the Midwest. We're not talking about getting interviews at FANG or something like that. Just to give some perspective, I wasn't like a 4.0 student in college or anything like that. um, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, it was like maybe talk a little bit about what people should expect going into technical interviews in the Midwest. Like what's one look like?
Yeah, so I saw quite a few different things. The way most of them work, I think, is you'll have a Zoom meeting or maybe a phone call with a developer, and you'll also be sharing a screen in an IDE or through a website like HackerRank. And they'll give you a problem. You can ask some questions, and a lot of it is not necessarily solving it right away, but just communicating your thought process, breaking the problem down.
Okay.
Um, as far as like just the sheer difficulty of the problems, my advice is pick up a book called Cracking the Coding Interview. And that book it's marketed towards people who want to get hired at like FANG, but I think interviews here in the Midwest are conducted fairly similarly. So if you read the introductory chapters in that book, do some basic problems, you'll be in pretty good shape.
Okay. That's good to hear because some of the interviews I've heard about are like a lot less technical and more behavioral. Did you find yourself having many behavioral interviews?
For sure. Or there'd be a lot of cases where you have some behavioral interviews, then the technical interview
Okay.
as well. One place I had an HR interview, a brief interview with the software manager, then a take-home project,
Okay.
which is when they just give you some requirements and say, hey, code this up and submit it to us within the week.
Right.
And then I had a semi-technical interview.
This was all before the on-site, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Was there anything surprising about any of the interviews you had?
Um, I feel like they were all pretty straightforward. No,
Or
no
like,
big surprises. We talked a bit about it being difficult to get taken seriously with side projects at some companies.
sure. So was that like
Um,
probably one of the bigger challenges you faced interviewing was just talking about side projects? I think also like maybe you can hit on uh, your challenges about talking about NetSuite because not a lot of people are familiar with it.
right. Um, yeah, I feel like in our industry, there's a huge amount of emphasis placed on you got to be doing side projects. You got to keep your GitHub active, things like that. Um, well, I did that, but still got heavily limited by being in some lesser known technologies before going to Japan.
Right.
Um, so to get around that, um, now, like I said, some companies, they're just not having it, especially when you're talking to recruiters who aren't technical.
Right.
But for the ones who were more open to side projects, and plenty of companies are, I think if they are, they're probably a really good company. It was about with NetSuite. What I ended up doing was just find other strengths in your old job. So what I started to really realize with mine is I could play to the fact that I was in consulting. I didn't have, and it was at a smaller company. So in that environment, they don't have the same training resources. You're on your own a lot more. So I realized I had a lot of stories I could tell to interviewers about like conflicts with coworkers and trying to learn things on your own, manage deadlines and stuff all by yourself, which
Sure.
I think is pretty impressive for someone's first job straight out of college, being in a role where you have that extreme level
Right.
of independence.
Right. I definitely think it speaks to a candidate when they take on additional responsibilities and really have to do all the parts of the software development life cycle.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I did was started getting interviewers to ask me more about data structures and algorithms.
Okay.
So like you can say during an interview, say you've been revamping your technical skills, working on some projects, and also getting back into the core fundamentals of data structures and algorithms and object-oriented design.
Right.
Because for someone like me, interviews went a lot better when I could get the people interviewing me to, instead of asking me, oh, do you know blah, blah, blah in .NET? Instead of asking me, do you know entity framework, get them to ask me, do you know the difference between an interface and a
Abstract class. An interview question that everybody asks, what's the difference between an interface and an abstract class? You better know it. So yeah, why was like kind of going into the topic of controlling the interview from the candidate's perspective. So in his example, he was controlling the interview to have the interviewer ask him questions about things he knew. So more OO stuff rather than some specific technical things. How'd that go for you, Wyatt? Because I know we had talked about it a little bit a while
Good.
back when you were interviewing, and then you're like, oh, that's great. And then you tried it and like it seemed to work out.
Good. Well, I guess we don't really even know, because the company I work at now was the first time I tried it, and they hired me and made me a good offer and everything. So
I call it a success.
I only had to try it once and it worked.
Brilliant. It must work then. No, just kidding. I don't know. I don't know. I think it's nice. I think it's refreshing. Like if you're in a tough interview and they keep asking you things you just don't know, instead of just saying I don't know, a better way to respond is like, hey, I don't really know this, but is it similar to X, Y, and Z? Or I've had experience with these things. We can go into more detail if you want. Things like that.
Yeah, I agree. And some employers might really even like it just if you're able to say, I don't know, but this is how I learn it.
Right.
I do know this, which is kind of related. I have the fundamentals. If you say things like that, that can go a long way.
Right. Showing that you take initiative and figure out that you enjoy learning and picking up new things and can solve the problem if you need it.
Right, exactly.
So maybe for like give people understanding of how many interviews, like let's talk about some of the numbers. So how many positions did you apply for?
Yeah, I started to keep a track of everything in a spreadsheet. I applied to about 70 or 80 companies.
Okay.
And that went to include a lot of recruiter talks I had.
Okay. So how many did
sometimes
you
applying to like 10 positions for one company.
Okay. So how many did you hear back from out of those that you applied to?
That's tricky because of coronavirus. What kind of happened was I had nothing for like 4 months straight. Not
Okay.
nothing, but definitely less than half.
It was pretty slow,
Yeah,
would you say?
yeah. And then, hmm,
Were you applying a lot
July,
at
August.
first, or were you kind of like just like slowly applying?
Yeah, and I definitely was sort of slowly applying,
Okay,
or I'd apply to like 10 jobs in one day.
sure.
Then
Then kind of just hang out for a bit.
just get
Yeah,
pessimistic about the process and just do nothing for a week straight.
I don't blame you. All right, so you said it was a little slow. So like 20% of those 80, did you hear back from, or was it even less than that? Like 10?
That sounds about right.
Okay. And then of those, how many did you go into? Sounds like you probably had recruiter phone calls with all of those. And then how many of those did you think you went into technical interviews with?
It's hard to remember now.
Because I feel like you had probably like somewhere around 10 technical interviews, I think.
That sounds about right. Maybe a few less.
Okay.
Maybe if you want to include just getting as far as getting the interview with the engineers.
Okay. That's pretty good. Like if you, because a lot of them, it sounds like once you got past the recruiter interview, you made it to the final round at least,
Yeah,
which is
I agree
huge.
with that.
How many offers did you get within this 5 month period?
Um, 3 offers total,
Okay.
including the one I took. Yeah, there were 2 offers I turned down before taking the job I have now.
Okay.
That was really stressful. Um, and I almost took them too.
Why is
But
that? Why was it? I guess if you care to share why you were stressed about deciding whether or not to take the offer.
so with coronavirus and being out of the industry for a year, having niche technology skills on my resume, it was really, really hard to know my worth. And the very first offer I got after like 5 months of unemployment was not good. It was way below even the offers I had fresh out of college. Didn't have proper benefits. Um,
Was it? Did the position sound interesting to you at all?
um, Somewhat. It was working with um, technologies I was interested in. It was using PHP with an MVC framework, so
Okay.
not WordPress or anything like that.
Okay.
So it was a back-end developer position for a consulting company, a smaller company.
Okay.
Um,
Did you want to stay in consulting?
I did not.
Okay.
Um,
So that was probably a good call then not to take that one.
right, but on the other hand, it's hard. It was very hard to know my value, and it's hard to
Right.
know, hey, should I take this job and then find something better down the road, or do I keep looking?
Right. So how did you go about making that decision then?
Talking to friends, um, it really is about talking to or making friends with people who are smarter and more successful than you, people who you want to emulate, and learning from them, getting advice from them, figure out what they did to get to where they are.
Sure. Yeah, I
I
think
had
that's
friends who said don't settle. I had friends who said just take it.
right. I think it also depends on your financial situation too. Like if you're
That
really hurting
too.
for money, maybe it
I
wouldn't
was
make sense to take the job.
fortunate enough to be able to stay at my parents rent free upon coming back from Japan. So I was able to search for as long as I needed to.
Yeah, that's really nice. What was so that you had one offer that was bad, and then how was the second offer?
The second offer was a lot better. It was working with the technologies I wanted.
Okay.
The salary and compensation was in line for someone with 2 years of experience.
Okay.
That's worth noting too. I worked for 2 years, then upon coming back from Japan, was still able to ask for um, positions requiring 2 years of experience or saying I want a salary for someone with 2 years of experience. It wasn't like 2 years, but then -1 for being away for a year or anything like that.
Sure.
No,
Sure.
your experience, especially if you've been programming in your spare time, things like that. Um, a gap year should not take away from previous experience.
Well, that's good. So, how did
So,
you go about understanding your value when it came to looking at these offers and negotiating?
right. That goes back to what I was saying earlier about you gotta have friends in your industry who can help you with interviews, um, who understand your skills and can say things like, well, I know people with your exact skills and they make this much money. So we
Sure.
can confidently say you're worth this much. And it's very difficult to do that on your own.
Right? Because you can just go to Glassdoor, look at stuff, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really tell you a ton about the market, and it's better to know somebody. And um, I think just seeing some numbers online doesn't always paint the picture. When
Yeah.
if you
My
know
advice
somebody, then
is
it's truthful, you know?
don't be afraid to talk to your friends in your industry from college or at different companies or wherever about how they got to where they are, um, what they do, their skills, even salaries. I think more and more people are sharing their salaries with friends ever since the '08 recession.
Yeah. Um, what would you say is like through your whole job searching, what is like the number one thing that helped you land this job? Or like that helped you the most throughout the process, I guess?
Um, that's hard to say.
Do you feel like it was just a numbers game?
That's definitely part of it. It's just kind of a numbers game. Um, I know sometimes I'd apply to a place, get rejected, and then I'd ping a recruiter directly on LinkedIn or say a friend got recruiter spam from that company, they'd recommend me, and then I get an interview.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. Tell us about like LinkedIn. Was like LinkedIn a key tool you used to like find jobs to apply to or like get in touch with recruiters, or how'd that play a part in your job searching?
um, Actually, I don't think it helped a whole lot. I
Okay.
think it mostly came from, I think most of my interviews came either from talking to a recruiter who took a liking to me
Okay.
or applying directly on company websites. Um, Spamming that quick apply button on LinkedIn generally doesn't cut it.
Okay. Did you did you have any leads from people who like did you get a lot of in mails on LinkedIn? Like, did any of those help get you leads for new jobs, or how
Yeah.
that?
And it's worth mentioning that my second offer that was a decent offer. Um, Not decent, it was a good offer. I should say that came from a recruiter.
Through LinkedIn? You met the recruiter on LinkedIn,
Actually,
or did you
yes,
apply?
that was through a recruiter I met on LinkedIn who submitted me to a company.
Okay. Did
Like,
you DM that recruiter, or did they DM you?
um, they DM'd me.
Okay. Did you feel like you got a lot of DMs?
Yes, although you got to remember these guys probably DM 100 people a day.
Sure.
So it's a numbers game, like we were saying earlier.
Yeah.
But
Because I feel
pursue them because you never know.
right.
And those people, because their job is to place people in jobs and find jobs that are a good fit for you, they can give you insight onto how much you're worth. Um, Third-party recruiters, um, don't be afraid to tell them about your goals, why you left your previous job, salary ranges, things like that. They'll help you with that stuff. Um, and they generally want to get you more money because the more money you make, the more money they make.
Right. Oh, I knew that part, but like it's interesting just that you were talking with recruiters and you were leveraging them to find your value. Like, how much am I worth? Like, I think that's really cool. Like, that's a great hack.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's interesting because they can say, "Oh, I placed these people in the last month, and they were making this much
Hmm.
with X number of years of experience, or similar tech stack, whatever it
Yeah.
might be."
And some of them even revealed to me, oh, I've been getting a lot of phone calls from people at this company. Stay away from them. A lot of people are trying to get out.
Okay, that's interesting.
Even trends, they're not technical, but they could still tell you things like, I got a lot of people with this on their resume and they're struggling, or, oh, everyone who's had this on their resume, they get placed, no problems. They can tell you things like that.
Oh, that's nice. One thing I found super interesting about how you were finding jobs during your searching was by applying directly at companies. I've never really had any success in that in the past. Really, it's all been um, LinkedIn DMs or networking at a career fair or a meetup. So I thought that was very interesting because that's a lot different than what I normally see.
I have a theory for why that is.
Yeah, why is that?
Um, you have more trendy tech on your resume than me. Um, and I have a hunch that when you apply directly to a company, a developer or technical leader might cruise through those. But stuff on LinkedIn, like, and stuff you apply through Easy Apply with, that's pretty much solely the domain of like recruiters and HR people.
Sure,
LinkedIn is built for them.
sure.
So those guys, they're looking at the tech on your resume and X number of years of experience. But um, when you apply directly online, it's a little directly on their website. It's a little more likely that a technical person will see your resume and see something that a non-technical person just isn't going to be able to see.
Yeah,
What do you
that's
think?
interesting. I guess maybe because I never had success, I don't usually apply through websites anymore. Um, just like through LinkedIn jobs or even uh, on the company's website unless I'm like super interested in the job and I haven't got reached out to. So I guess yeah. So maybe it's the companies you're applying to through their site. They were getting to the manager or the engineers were screening your resume and it stuck out. I think that's great. Yeah.
generally speaking, that's supposed to be better because it takes more work.
Right. Right, because then from their perspective, you just have these candidates on your doorstep. You just need to sort through them to figure out which ones fit best, you know,
Mm-hmm.
versus I got to go find these candidates, so then reach out. Yeah, interesting. Um, let's see. Talked a bit about job searching. Anything else like COVID wise that made job searching hard?
Um,
Like, did you find that a lot of companies were still hiring or not hiring?
right, a lot of companies just weren't hiring. I even had some companies where I'd apply or even get a first interview, and then they cancel the process, say they weren't hiring anymore.
Okay.
Like I was saying earlier, it was pretty slow for a solid like 4 months, and then it picked up, which made it that much more difficult to know my worth.
Right, right. Is there any other advice you'd give other people in your position? So new software engineers or uh, people who are just trying to get back into software engineering right now. Any advice you would give them?
Hmm. I think it's all about taking advantage of how you can control the interview and do stuff in your spare time if you can. Like we said, it's kind of cool how in software engineering that you can do stuff in your spare time. Um, I know maybe some people hate that because they feel like they have to do stuff in addition to your job, in addition to their job.
Right.
But on the other hand, it gives you a way to attain skills that your job isn't giving you. Um, for out of work, you can keep your skills up, learn new things. So it has its advantages.
Yeah. It's kind of a good showcase too. Like if you have stuff on your GitHub, it's a good showcase.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know when I uh, screen candidates, I definitely check out their GitHub and see what they've been working on, if anything.
If someone's been working full time, do you believe that they should have stuff on their GitHub yet?
Uh, I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker. If they do have stuff, and I go look at it and I find out I look and it's nicely documented, and they got some cool projects that spark my interest. Those are definitely things that stick out to me, and make me want to know more about them and dive into some of the different challenges they faced, that might be applicable to the position that I'm hiring for.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think it's worth mentioning too that you don't have to do something totally different outside of your job in your spare time. If you're a web developer, your GitHub projects can totally be web development. You don't have to pick up x86 assembly or something.
Yeah.
I think that's what most people do.
Yeah.
Like in my spare time in Japan, I was doing React and Node.js because NetSuite used JavaScript. So it just seemed like the natural progression
Right.
from that. I didn't go completely, I didn't do a total 180 and get into assembler or something like that.
Right. 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 So you've been at your new job for a few weeks. How's the transition been from not being at a software engineering job for about a year and a half to now jumping back into it?
Um, it's been good. Like I wouldn't say I've been struggling with it or anything like that. Um, so
Is it like riding a bike?
Um,
Or not quite that
well, like I
easy?
said, you gotta do it you gotta start programming as a hobby when you're not working full time.
Yeah,
And
fair.
but yeah, I think the stuff I was doing in my spare time while I was in Japan and while I was unemployed, I think it all definitely um, applied and is helping me in my current role.
Okay, that's good. Has it been like a challenge getting onboarded eh, because you're working remotely due to COVID, or how's that been?
Yeah, I suppose it's going to depend on the company,
Sure.
but it hasn't been too bad. I'm working remotely, so it's difficult to pick up on the company culture that way
Yeah,
because it's you're not casually talking to people as much.
right. You're not
You're not
passing people in the
doing what
hall or
people do in their desk all day and stuff like that.
right.
Um, but key thing is don't be afraid to ping people on Teams or Slack or whatever you're using. Um, turn your camera on sometimes, at least, so
Yeah,
you can see your face, especially since you're new. Um,
it's nice seeing people's faces on like meetings.
mhm,
Like otherwise, if it's just a little bubble with their name, it's just like, well, I'm just talking to a screen by myself. Like this isn't any fun.
yeah, but it hasn't been too bad, and my company even acknowledged that this is the first time we've brought someone on during COVID and totally remotely like this, so it's going to be a challenge for us too. So just um, be open about communication and any anything you're struggling with.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, definitely seeing like working remotely hasn't changed a ton for me, but it's just like okay, it's you just have to over communicate things. Um, yeah, but other than that, it hasn't been terrible. Put
I
in a little
agree.
extra effort to hit up somebody you don't talk too much anymore, or, touch base, you know.
Oh, there's another thing we should talk about. So it's I mentioned I had a my very first offer was not good,
Yeah,
but then I we briefly mentioned I had a second offer that was pretty good, and I came very close to taking it
yeah.
until some friends talked me out of it. Um,
Okay.
that so the money was there. I clicked well with their developer. They were using technologies I liked using and wanted to get more into, but upon talking with friends and some recruiters, what I started to realize was that there were some deal breakers with that job, which was that it was a smaller company that most recruiters and hiring managers aren't going to have heard of.
Okay.
And they only had one other developer, just one other guy. I got along with the guy during the interview process and everything. I think I would have enjoyed working with him, but especially when you're inexperienced, you need to have a whole team of developers to be on and learn from and have you need people who have been doing it for 20 years that you can learn from, things like that. So just one other developer, you probably get limited very quickly.
Right. Yeah, that's good to think about. Is it sounds like you were thinking about your career growth and you're like, well, if I have five other developers on my team, that's more people I can go to and ask questions and learn from and get mentorship and really expand your skills.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that was a really good choice.
um, and after that I really started to realize and understand that what you need early on in your career, at least in my opinion, is you need to work at a large company that has a team of experienced developers that you can learn from. Early on in your career, you probably don't want to be in consulting or startups or little mom and pop shops because they don't have the resources to train you.
Right.
They're probably not making large software applications. If you want to do those things down the road, go ahead. But I think it's really nice to, right after college, put in some years at a large, well-known company.
Yeah. I think one of the things that helped me a ton in my career is I worked at a large Fortune, I think it was like 200 company, and just the abundance of opportunities and the smart people I was surrounded by, that I was able to learn a lot of things fast and have a lot of opportunities to work on different things. And then that's just really helped me craft my skills.
Mm-hmm. Something I was frustrated with my first job out of college was the fact that it was consulting. And the way consulting just kind of works is those guys, consulting companies, they have many clients. And a lot of times they're focused on billing the client, getting the software out the door.
Sure.
Um, when you're at a large company writing software for the company, that company is more incentivized to write good, maintainable, long-term code.
Yeah.
And that code tends to be worth more money. There's a good chance you'll make more money, I feel like, because at a consulting company, your code is worth X amount of money, whatever the client's paying. And you get that money, and then that's it, it's done.
Right.
When you're writing code for a company, well, that company is more incentivized to write code that's maintainable, something where they can add more features on down the road, things like that. They'll also be more incentivized to have you really know their business so that you can write better software for them, as opposed to consulting where you're working with many companies. You might know just enough to get the project done, and that's it. You move on to the next company.
Right. So bigger companies are really just taking the time to invest in you, so that
Right.
you write better code and build better systems.
Right. And that's just my personal experience. Some people really love consulting because you can see a lot of different projects. Sometimes you can touch a lot of different technologies. But in my experience from my previous jobs, companies I interviewed with, at least early in your career, consulting's just not going to provide opportunities needed for less experienced developers.
Sure. Are you glad you got back into software engineering?
Yeah, a lot more money than teaching English.
Yeah. I think doing that experience in Japan must have been super cool. I kind of wish I would have did a gap year or something. Or like study abroad. I think it would have been really cool.
Yeah, that would have been ideal if I could have done it in college, but studying abroad is expensive.
Yeah. I think now just like if COVID we found like a vaccine, whatever happened, COVID's done with, would I go back to the office or remote? I enjoy the office because collaboration's better. I like the team aspect of it, really feeling like a team. You're closer, you get in sync, you're cranking out stuff. But I think the freedom of working remote is powerful, and I could definitely see myself going abroad and just working for a month or two, and just trying it out, learning a new culture and picking up a new language. I think would be awesome.
Go to get a student visa to study the language in whatever country, and then work remotely part-time.
Yeah.
That's I think there's a name for that, the digital nomad lifestyle.
Okay. Sure.
I did teaching English, which is also pretty popular. Yeah, it was teaching English in elementary and junior high schools as like an assistant, and you get the same breaks the kids get.
That's kind of
Make a little
nice.
bit of money.
Yeah. All right, Wyatt. Well, I think you've covered everything that I kind of wanted to go into. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about on the podcast?
I don't think so.
All
I
right.
think we covered a lot of ground.
Is there any you have any cheesy plugs you want to tell the people? Go subscribe to your.
Go to wordcomplete.com.
Okay. I'll be sure to link that in the show notes below. It's a fun game. Wyatt and I have played it several times when he was in Japan. It's great. Yeah, wordcomplete.com. Yeah, with that said, thanks for listening.
Actually, that's wrong. It's
What is it?
wordcompleteonline.com.
Okay. I'll make sure to get that right in the show notes. Yeah, thanks for listening to another episode of the 0+1 podcast. Stay tuned. As always, I'm your host, Hayden Wade. Thank you, Wyatt, so much for being on this episode of the podcast. You shared some great insights, and I think it'll be helpful to a lot of people out there who are searching for a job during these times.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Sounds good.